Okay, so we'll call to order the CRSL meeting at 7:08 p. Is that right? The right time? Yeah, 7:08 p.m. Any public comment on the agenda? No one here, so no. All right, so we'll move forward with the agenda.
Okay, good evening, everybody. There are a couple items, literally, on the agenda tonight. And the first one was the school start time. We had received an email requesting that we put it on the agenda for discussion and talk about what has been discussed in the past. I know this was brought up to the board about 2 years ago. And we talked about it, the pros, the cons. Dr. Christian, are there some things that you would like, insight you'd like to lend into this?
I certainly, I can talk about my experience with this topic in my previous setting, but I certainly would appreciate any questions the board may have before I give my comments.
Does anybody have any comments that they would like to make regarding the start time?
Yeah, I'll start. So yeah, I know that there's a lot of research out there, and I know a lot was shared to us via email around, for the older students having a later start time and younger students having an earlier start time, perhaps, whatever the case might be. And so I imagine that there's probably a lot of logistics, transportation, obviously goes into that. But I just wonder what else plays into the decision-making process besides transportation and after school, sports, those sort of things.
I just know from talking to some like juniors and seniors, one thing which I hadn't thought about before is because I think they do have a pulse on different conversations that are going on, is a couple of them said to me, what about our after school jobs? Which is something I think, we look at like the academic side of it, but not necessarily what kids of that age are doing after school. So as much as the educational impact, but I think also extracurricular, but also, their employment as they're in that, junior, senior year of looking to work.
And also not knowing the details of the conversation that happened a couple of years ago. I understand that there were benefits identified, but there were also some cons identified as well, as to not be disruptive across the board to the entire district. And so if we were to take a look at this again, I would just want to make sure that we're being fair and equitable across the board, because I think having like one grade or one level of schooling start earlier than the other is not necessarily the solution, because every child is different in terms of their ability to be active right in the morning versus the afternoon, and so we still have to look at this across the board and be fair and equitable.
I think one of the biggest things that hit me when we had this discussion a few years ago that I don't think I'd ever even considered was if you are moving young children to earlier and you look at what it's like out now, and if they're standing at their bus stops in the dark, or they are going home to an empty house in the afternoon, those were things that I had never even thought about. I was thinking, after school activities, sports, jobs, but I wasn't thinking about the downside to younger kids going to school so early in the morning. And I think that we need to look at all of this, and it's a wide range. We have older kids who take care of their little kids, or who are home there in the afternoon when little kids get home. So we have like you're saying, Gail, families with lots of different rationale for why this is a good or a bad thing. And I think Dr. Christian's done some good things with talking about alternatives. So I think that's something that I think we need to talk about.
Yeah, and I was going to
Also,
say, because
what
this
is,
is, sorry.
sorry. I was just going to say, also, what is, and Dr. Christian might know this, because I believe, like, pushing our start time back a half an hour, like, isn't there a cutoff where they say the benefit of how late our high schoolers would need to start to truly reap the benefits of a later start time? I think there's some data and research on that, of how much later it needs to be.
I don't remember the specific day. For some reason, 30 to 45 minutes sticks in my head, but I'm not positive about that.
Yeah, I thought it was like after 8:30 in the morning, maybe, so it was like considerably later, but I'm not sure. That would be something to look into, like how late.
And as
the
much
start
as I
time need
know
to be.
some districts have implemented this, I think our district is somewhat different in terms of our bus routes and our ability to make a lot of changes. And I assume you're going to be able to talk about that, Dr. Christian. But I think that's really important to look at because we're not quite as fortunate as some districts who don't have the kind of traffic and issues that we have here.
And along those lines, what I was going to say in terms of transportation, not that we would be anywhere close to making a decision on this year, but howsoever, we have a school bus driver shortage right now. And so on top of our already complicated process, you would add that on top of that. So I think that issue has to be resolved completely before we would entertain making a change.
I think on that note, Dr. Kristen, you have lots of notes there. It's time for you to talk.
No problem. So I think the board, everybody raised excellent points. And whenever we talk about a potentially significant change to our structure, there's two questions that I always ask. What's the impact on kids and families? What's the impact on the educational program? And they need to be our guiding questions. There is, since 2015 and probably a little bit before, there's been research conducted for the benefit of high school students having a later start time, specifically 8:30 or later. That includes better mental health and physical, better mental and physical health, reducing the risk of car accidents for those who are student drivers early in the morning, and less tardiness. And then some studies also include improved academic success. More recently, those studies have been expanded not to just include high school students, but also middle school students. And so there certainly is research out there that supports it. There's also, as Sharon mentioned, there are, without a doubt, logistical challenges. There's also the reality of the fact that it's not just logistics for how the school district will handle it, but if any district chooses to move to a later start time, how will families fill that time? Will it be filled with additional morning practices rather than evening practices with extracurricular activities? Will it be filled by students accessing electronics and social media in the morning earlier, or will it be filled by sleep? So whenever you talk about this, there's no absolutes. Even the American Association of Pediatrics says that any delayed school time that has should be studied, but you also need that contributing and potentially other factors such as excessive demands on students' time because of homework, extracurricular activities, after-school employment, social networking, and electronic media use. So it's not a subject for the faint of heart, without a doubt. From our perspective, there are certainly logistical challenges with us. Transportation was mentioned a couple of times. One of our neighboring districts just put out, they're going to be doing a series of discussions about it, and they actually already put out what the options are, even before the open forums. One of the options is to flip elementary and secondary. I do not see this as feasible because not only do I not want our youngest students out at bus stops early in the morning in the dark, we also have many families that have multiple children, and they utilize their older children perhaps for daycare in the afternoons, so that you can't have high school students coming home an hour after elementary students. The other option, another option would be to bring in everybody simultaneously. That is clearly a non-starter because it would double our bus fleet. Even if we had the ability to double our budget from $3.5 million to $7 million approximately, even if we had the buses, we don't have the drivers, and no district has the drivers. A third option from a logistics standpoint would be to speculate, perhaps start the move from a three-tiered busing system. We drive the high school kids, then the middle school kids, then our elementary students, to a two-tiered system. That would be really helpful if the building we're in right now was the middle school and not the 4-5 building, because the middle school is on the edge of the district over on the Norristown border, and the high school is where it is. And if I defy anybody to drive from the middle school to the high school at between 7:45 and 8:15, and I don't know, what do you think?
And then add twice as many buses.
Correct. Well, it wouldn't be twice as many with a two-tiered system. It would probably, rough estimate would be 8 to 10 buses, maybe 7 if we're lucky. But you would run into challenges where you would literally pick up students maybe near the middle school who have to go to the middle school, but that bus is going to high school first. So they would drive out to the high school and then back to the middle school. So it's not just as simple as going to a two-tiered system. There's proximity challenges too. Some districts are, the way they're configured, they have their high school and middle school right on the same campus. So it's a little more feasibly done. But even if you said you were starting, my point is, if we said we're going to go to a two-tier system and try to move back a half hour, the two schools wouldn't start at the same time. You just simply could not. You have to pick either the AM or the PM, and you wouldn't start at the same time. Certainly some challenges, as Mrs. Moore mentioned, with students who have after-school employment, and certainly some challenges for families who, as I mentioned, utilize older children to help supervise younger children. And I've received comments from families, too, that they're fine with how things currently are, that they don't want to see a change. It's not for everybody. So, where do you find the balance? And therein lies the rub. I think one potential, and it's not a panacea, but one possible solution would be to take a look at our program of studies, as we saw during the curriculum meeting, and offer, COVID did not provide us with a lot of good things. It provided us with many challenges. But one thing it absolutely did, our staff became masters at asynchronous and synchronous learning, particularly the use of Canvas and Google Classroom. We had many teachers who were very talented in that prior to COVID, but everybody is comfortable using our learning management system now. And I think, and I mentioned this in chatting with some board members last week, I think there's a potential there for families who would want to choose the option because they think their child would need a later start time and more rest, to take an online course, and we would offer it during first period of that student's schedule. It would be primarily asynchronous because the student wouldn't be taking it during first period. He or she would be taking it at their leisure. But we have several teachers that record their lectures. I think of Mr. Coletta. I think of some of our other science teachers and math teachers that students watch the lecture, and when they come into class, they get right to work on their particular lab or the particular project-based assignment that's due that day. And then therefore, those students, since our high school is on, the blocks are 60, 65 minutes, they would then be able to come in at 8:30 and take what I call a zero period or first period online. I had some success with this in my previous setting. We had about 20, 25 students that took advantage of that. And our plan, just so the board knows this, is that we already are planning, and we've been working with our staff, because our goal in the next several years is to make our high school program of studies available in person or online. So that's not just to help with this particular situation, but also we want to be able to compete with cyber charter schools and keep our students in our schools. And we certainly have the technology, we have the wherewithal, and we have the teaching staff to do it. So there's no reason why we can't offer those courses in a dual platform. Like I said, it's not a panacea, but for those families that would be looking for the opportunity to have their children get more rest, which is clearly a challenge, not only for high school students, but I think for middle school students. This, I think, is a plausible alternative, and it allows time. If we can get this up and running by next school year, 23-24, if the board asks us to do a more in-depth study of school start times, it provides that opportunity. I'm aware of one district in the Commonwealth that recently is starting all of their students at 9:45. And that's because they did the same math as we did. The logistics of flipping is not working. The logistics of bringing everybody in simultaneously wouldn't work. So they're offering basically first period is asynchronous and it's online. The students still have the high school comes in at 9:30, 9:45, and they have the same dismissal time of 2:50, 3 o'clock. And I have no interest in that because we did that for a year and a half with COVID. And we are certainly seeing, not only last year and this year, the benefits of in-person learning. If you asked me 5 years ago if I have ever offered an online course, I probably would have told you no, because I still buy books that have a hard copy. And I don't read from a device or a Kindle or anything like that. But the reality is we need to be able to, move forward with the times and the digital world in which we live. And I think this would provide potentially a good balance and meet the needs of those who would like additional rest versus those who favor a traditional schedule. I'll take any questions the board may have.
I have a quick question. So looking at this a couple of years ago, were there any conversations about, for example, if we were to make changes to the elementary school, how does that impact before and after care? Because we're unique in that way as well, because it's housed within our buildings. And so by making those changes, they would have to make a change as well. And they're not owned and operated by the school district. So was there any conversation?
We never got as far as to talk to, what are they called now? Wonder Spring. They didn't have the same name a few years ago when we did this. Yeah, so we never got that far.
On the surface, it shifts the burden to the afternoon more so than the morning.
Are they still at 6 now? Do they close at 6? Is pickup time by 6 o'clock now?
I assume it's not possible, but as we're discussing electives, and I know like the middle school is A day and B day, there's not a scenario where we could have teachers that started later and offered a class at 2:30 or whatever for an elective for students who want to take an extra class or students who wanted to come in late. I know someone when I was in college, whether my first class was 8 a.m. or noon, I was exhausted because I stayed up the night before too long. I didn't plan accordingly. I didn't use that extra time well. But there are students that maybe they're not a morning person or they would benefit from that. And if there was an option to offer staggered schedules, that might be a solution for the 20-some students that said, I can use this, or I have a late night job that I use to support my family and starting later would help me. That type of scenario might be a way to kind of hedge our bets on that sort of thing if we wanted to.
It certainly would, and those discussions would be collectively bargained. Even putting this topic aside of school start times, even just offering courses online, we need to collectively bargain that, but that would be included in that. I think that's a great idea because I think there would be some teachers who would enjoy that because of their own personal schedules, and they would prefer to maybe have a flex schedule.
What would we then not be obligated to transport 2 times?
Great question. It would all depend upon the number of students that would choose. If this was the avenue we would take, it would depend upon the number of students and the courses that they would take. I would only offer it in the high school to start. If there's only 5, we're not, we could send a van out. If there's 55, we could do sort of like the activity bus route. But there would be the potential in the first year of doing it requiring parents and/or students to drive themselves. That's a whole nother. We can accomplish it. It's just the bus schedules are daunting enough.
I'd want to be very careful about that latter option, because then it's only those kids who can drive themselves or whose parents have the freedom
Sure.
to drive them that would be able to access that. Yeah.
We've been able over the summer too. Summer's easier, but we've been able to offer transportation to our programs. And just like, it would be, we'd have to gather that data during the high school subscription process, and we'd know by March, so we just need some time to plan it. My other concern is that, father of 3 kids who had varying levels of activity, is that I am concerned that for some of the districts that have moved to a later start time, while certainly well intended and has some backing, that how many families and how many kids fill that time in the morning with other things. And I can speak more to students. My daughter was more involved in the arts, and my son's in athletics. But once you get to high school, there's morning band practice, there's morning swimming practice, there's morning lifting, and so I know I live near an ice rink, and they're vying for ice time all the time. I just wonder if it would shift, not for all students, but it would shift, the focus of when you can get your activities done. I think the time will get filled, and I don't have any scientific data on that, but I know Unionville Chadsford and their superintendent and I are pretty good friends. I know when they did this several years ago, they moved a half an hour. They moved from 7:35 to 8 o'clock. But they also had their middle school already wasn't starting until approximately 8:30. I have to go back and talk to John, but I know they were able to do it and only have to add 1 or 2 buses, and they were able to move a half hour, but moving a full hour was not plausible for them. And this, notwithstanding, we certainly want kids to be safe. I don't want to make this about dollars, but there is an absolute reality with getting bus drivers right now. We're barely covering, every district is barely covering what they have. And I'm open to suggestions if there's some way to get, run a different type of bus system, but all the math problems we look at requires more drivers in this particular scenario.
So I'm sure that this isn't the first time, right? We obviously know this is not the first time this conversation has came up, whether it be from the board or from parents. So just want to make sure that what is it that we're saying are the next steps, so that those parents that are asking, they have an answer as to what are the next steps as part of this conversation.
I think it's really important to know how much interest there really is. As far as I know, we've gotten about 2 or 3 emails on the subject, maybe more.
2 or 3. That's all. I've gotten 2.
So, and in my time here, this is the second go-round on this, and it was about the same the last time. There were only not even a handful of people. And I understand that if they have problems with their kids getting up in the morning, that it's important to them. But I think your idea is the least disruptive. If we could manage to pull that off, I think that'd be fabulous.
By January or February, we already have families planning for the next school year with their Wonder Spring needs and/or other daycares that they may utilize. My recommendation this evening for the board to consider is for us to continue with our pursuit of online courses, entertain a discussion with CEA, and make sure it's bargained fairly. And then be able to offer that in 23-24 for families that would like, any family that was interested in starting later, and at least offer that as a start. And that would be potentially our pilot for that. And then if the board wants us to do a more in-depth study, I think we really would need to take some time this spring into the summer. If we were going to make a recommendation to change for 24-25, I would want to do it prior to the new year of 24. I think low and slow is the way to go on this, because any decision this monumental, there are unintended consequences. As much as we think we have all the answers, I'm sure we will get feedback from families that are, or scenarios that we're not thinking of. But at least in the short term, Rosemary, we feel pretty confident we're going to be ready to go, at least with some of our courses for online.
Yes, we've been working with the Cyber Academy coordinator from Downingtown School District for over a year now. So we have a team at PW that has already been working on them. The course study proposals and requests that come in will give us a good idea of which courses we want to select for making this asynchronous work.
And I would say, I feel like right now, at least my feeling is, I would rather put time into developing our online platform to hopefully get some of our cyber charter school students back into our district. And like we said, I know there are a few families that have brought this up about a later start time, but I think if we have to prioritize what our goals are and where we want to put our resources, I think the online makes sense. And then if we can help with the later start time of the course, like that you said, that sort of 0 block in the morning, to meet various needs, but not to spread ourselves too thin by, going after really looking at a later start time if it's not something that we really think we would end up doing in the long run.
One thing to add, too, it would not be, if we're successful in launching some of these courses, they would not be entirely asynchronous. There has to be contact between the teacher and the student. There would be office hours. There would be required check-ins. There might even be times where the student's required to come in during that first period because, as we certainly learned, we knew this before, but the pandemic proved it, that contact is critical. The students need as much as the teachers to be successful in any course. But I have to tell you, it's like some of the things our teachers are doing through Canvas and Google Classroom are pretty amazing. I'm jealous. I need to learn a little bit of it.
And I think as parents, we know our kids, and we know if the cyber is going to work or it's not going to work for our individual children. So I have 3, and I know that would only work for 1.
Do we have any sort of community obligation as far as traffic goes? If we were to push the start times back or go to the dual bus route and add more buses, that we'd be flooding an already congested region with more traffic?
I'm sure we get a lot of complaints from some people who couldn't get to work on time, but
I have, I wasn't ready to present it tonight, but I have Mr. Sobolowski and Mr. Brown just working on, from a purely logistical standpoint, what they would need as far as number of buses, and then calculating, we have GPS on the buses, calculating traffic time and things like that. So I'm sure I could bring out Chief Ward, as well as the chiefs from Conshohocken and Plymouth, and they would certainly be willing to share the challenges we have, as evidenced by 7:15 to 7:45 or 7:40 in the morning on Germantown Pike and 3 o'clock on Belvoir Road, which is much better now that the middle school is about 100 feet deeper. I went out there and watched. It used to be probably 40 or 50 cars on Belvoir Road. Now it's about 10. And now that the bus lot at the middle school is officially finished, and tomorrow they're starting the new bus route, hopefully it'll be 0 cars on Belvoir Road. So they painted the lines, not to get too far afield, but the lines that were painted incorrectly are now painted correctly.
Could I just ask a question around the tech high school? So what kind of impact would it have on the tech high school?
Oh, it would be, since we partner with Upper Marion and Norristown, if they weren't to move, we would probably have to move to an entire PM schedule. And that would be an unbalanced schedule for them, because they're up to 1,100 kids.
yeah. And they've also just been talking at the tech school about how wonderful it is that our kids are now AM and PM, and the balance is so much better, and it offers more opportunities for the kids to do. There's some programs that need one or the other, and ours were only ever in the afternoon, and now this year they're both. So I would think it would cause some obstacles for the tech school as well.
We might be able to figure out a way to keep some AM and PM. It would just, where can we make up that class? I would have to sit down and look at it, Sharon, and sit with Steve and Jason and think about how we could schedule the classes to make sure the kids got all their credits. It would definitely be a bit of an issue. The easy answer to say is they would all have to move to PM, but that's not the answer that Central Mako would want to hear. That's for sure. They might even be up to 1,200. Their programs are really expanding. So, like I said, our suggestion is to continue with an online option, put together a proposal for the board to come back and present what those courses would look like, and then we would advertise in the spring what it might look like for those families who desire a later start time. At least there would be some opportunity in the 23-24 school year. And then we can certainly visit Unionville. We can talk to some of the other districts that are doing a later start time and ask some questions and do a more in-depth study should the board want us to do that. But I would ask if we could do that probably between January and August.
Any other comments or ideas? Okay. The last item on the agenda stemmed from actually a meeting that we had last week, Gail, Jess, and I, and we were talking about things that exist in the district, and it became quite evident that there are things that are going on that people just don't know about. And oftentimes we get questions that are of a negative connotation. Why don't we do thus and such? Or why is it that this district has this and we don't? Only to discover that, lo and behold, we do, and have had for a long time. But it just hasn't been put out there. So people do have questions. I just don't think that people know who to ask or where to direct those questions. And we were thinking that if we were to come up with something that we could put on our website that might be kind of a right to know, but basically an I'd like to know about kind of thing, where people could then put their things. I'd like to know more about, I don't know, how many recesses we have. I'd like to know about what our foreign languages are like offered here. Things that people may have questions about, and then they could enter into this one location, and Kim could send it out to the appropriate people who could then respond. I don't know, is it ideas, thoughts?
I think it's a good idea. I know that over the years we've tried so many different things to get information out there, and we had parent council, and we had coffee something or another. We've tried all these different avenues to bring people, and we get all our administrators here, and then there's 15 administrators and 3 public. So I think rather than asking people to come to meetings to get this information, to be able to do it online would be wonderful, and people might access that. And I think that's a really good idea to give it a shot, because nothing else has worked. We moved those meetings from day meetings to night to say maybe people will come at night, but the only people that came at night were the same 3 or 4 that came during the day. And there were literally more board members and more administrators by far than there were community members. So I'd love to see us try some other way.
And what we could find out, I mean, it may be that there are a number of people who have a question about a particular topic, and that would be a great idea then for us to do a presentation so that a number of people could learn more about something. Or a video, yes.
Thank you. You can always, put a short video together as well.
So
One idea on that is I think the team does a great job of putting out content on the social media pages. If we were to encourage more feedback coming in that way, because it's meeting people where they are, you're engaging with them, and then you're putting out your question, like even just if it's a link to the web page, because the web page you can do two ways. You can do I'd like to know more about it, and then you have categories and kind of funnel them there. Or it's basically a blank submission, the same as writing an email I'd like to know more about. But if you're sending it out on social media, like I would like to engage with you, give me some topics, that sort of thing, then you can kind of direct and you're creating the content people didn't even know it was a question. That might be a good way to kind of get the interaction you're looking for where the kids are staring anyway. And then, but I think the team's been great. I learn more, almost as much about from the social media sites as I do from coming to the meetings. So, like, oh, this team won. This team.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not a social media person, however, but I'm the concept came about is because I was asking Karen and Jess a lot of questions, and not necessarily coming from a negative way, but just because I just didn't know, and so then the topic, then we arrived at this. Hey, I'd like to know about. Thank you, Jess, for the idea, so that we could also this could make it be able to be specific for that person, right? Because it may not be something that everybody needs to know. It may be very specific to the person who needs to know that information, and it could create additional dialogue between that person and whomever the question would go to, and that dialogue can continue and ultimately enable the relationship, which then creates a better sense of community. So it goes beyond, and no pun intended, community relations, but goes beyond the actual email or whatever the type of communication is. It's bigger and broader than that in terms of the full outcome.
In addition to the social media, I want to take a moment to thank Kim and Jess. I talked to Jess the other day. I think the district news that's been, it's always been good, but I think especially recently, there's been just such a nice balance. And that's something the board has asked us to do, and I think you guys have done a great job with it, a balance between academics, the arts, athletics. Just the news feed last week, the 7 or 8 different stories from K to 12, every school got highlighted in a variety of areas, and it's amazing some of the accomplishments that our kids and teachers are achieving. There were 2 or 3 things I was unaware of, and I had to call the principals and say I didn't know that. I was embarrassed, but no less impressed by all the good things that are going on.
Well, I think we have, it makes our jobs easy to do when we do have such phenomenal stories to tell. So, it's great. Yeah, it's wonderful to be able to share so many different positive. Hope they keep coming.
There's been a real emphasis on the service learning too, which I think is incredible. And I know Jess is planning another day of service in January for our students, and so we'll be releasing that. We'll give the board an update on that later this week. But there's some neat projects that will be coming forward for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Yeah, no snow.
Any public comment? All right. No public comment, so we will adjourn at 7:47. Thank you.
Go Birds.